It is a curious thing to think that for much of human history, we were not alone, and that the image we hold of humanity, tall, upright, clever-eyed, is only one thread in a far wider and stranger tapestry. For scattered across the ancient earth, there were once cousins and kin, unlike anything we know today. Some towering and robust, others delicate and small, but among them all, there was one species so tiny, so unlike our modern expectations, that when scientists first uncovered their bones, they thought they belonged to a child, yet they were wrong. For here on the remote island of Flores in Indonesia lived a people whose adult height was barely that of a modern toddler, whose bodies were compact and light, whose skulls were the size of a grapefruit, and whose existence seemed to defy all rules of human evolution. And it is their story we are about to tell. A story that begins not 60,000 years ago when they walked their last steps upon this earth, but in the humid year of 2003, when a team of Australian and Indonesian archaeologists dug deep into the limestone floor of a cave called Liangbua. Their torches flickering against ancient walls as trowels scraped soil, unaware that they were about to open a chapter of prehistory, unlike anything science had yet imagined. For what they uncovered was a nearly complete skeleton of an adult female. But she was so small, so impossibly small, standing no taller than 1 meter and weighing perhaps 25 kilograms, with delicate bones and a skull that seemed almost toy-like in its proportions. And yet every feature, every angle of her anatomy told the unmistakable truth. This was no modern human child, nor a dwarf with a growth disorder, but a fully grown member of a previously unknown species of human, one that would come to be named Homo floresiensis, though in the press and the popular imagination, they would quickly earn another name, a name borrowed from the pages of fiction, the Hobbits, after the tiny folk of J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth. And while the comparison was whimsical, the scientific implications were profound. For here was living, or rather, here had once been, living proof that human evolution was not a straight line from primitive to advanced, but a bushy, tangled tree where many branches sprouted and withered in parallel. Some tall, some small, each adapting in strange ways to their environment. And in the case of Homo floresiensis, that environment was the island of Flores, a place that even today feels distant and isolated, its rugged hills and volcanic peaks rising above a warm sea, its forests thick with birdsong and insect hum. But in the deep past, it was a world even stranger, populated by miniature elephants called stegodon, giant marabou storks, and enormous lizards akin to Komodo dragons. And into this mix lived these tiny humans, who, despite their size, hunted, made tools, and carved out a life in a land cut off from the mainland for hundreds of thousands of years. And to understand them, we must first understand the peculiar rule of evolution that shapes life on islands. For when a species finds itself isolated on a small landmass with limited resources, strange things happen. Big animals tend to grow smaller over generations, while small animals sometimes grow larger, a phenomenon biologists call the island rule or island dwarfism. And it is likely that Homo floresiensis descended from a population of early humans, perhaps Homo erectus, who reached Flores long ago and, over countless generations, adapted to the island's constraints by shrinking in size. For, on an island where the largest prey was a small elephant barely a meter tall, there was no advantage in being large and requiring more food. And thus, the lineage that would become H. floresiensis dwindled in stature, their bodies becoming lean, their metabolism efficient, their movements nimble, and their minds, though housed in smaller brains than ours, still keen enough to craft sharp stone tools, to hunt cooperatively, and perhaps to tell stories around the glow of firelight as the tropical night closed in. And yet, despite their accomplishments, they would remain hidden from our knowledge for tens of thousands of years after their disappearance, until that day in Liangbua when their bones came to light, setting off debates and controversies that would rage for years. For some scientists at first insisted they must be diseased modern humans, microcephalics or pygmies. But careful analysis of their skulls, wrists, feet, and other features revealed a unique blend of traits, some modern, some primitive, as if they were a time capsule preserving anatomy from an earlier chapter of human evolution. And as we journey deeper into their world, we will see how these little people lived, what they hunted, how they may have interacted with other human species, and what forces finally swept them into extinction, leaving behind only the stones they shaped, the bones they left in the soil, and the whisper of a mystery that still lingers in the forests of Flores today. A whisper that perhaps they did not vanish entirely, that in the folk tales of the island there survives a memory of the Ebugogo, small hairy people who could speak but mimicked rather than created language, said to have stolen food from villagers and sometimes children. And if such tales are more than mere invention, then maybe, just maybe, the last embers of Homo floresiensis burned far more recently than science has yet confirmed. But to understand this possibility, we must return to the beginning. Not the beginning of their discovery, but the beginning of their arrival on Flores. A journey across seas that should have been impossible for such small-bodied people, yet one that evidence suggests they or their ancestors must have made, for even in the deep past, Flores was never connected to the Asian mainland, meaning that whoever first set foot there had to have crossed water, whether clinging to drifting vegetation or intentionally crafting rafts. And from that moment, their fate was bound to the rhythms and limits of island life, a crucible that would shape them into the smallest humans ever to walk the earth. Their world was one of sharp contrasts, a place where lush green forests gave way to rocky volcanic slopes, and where rivers tumbled down in foaming white torrents before flattening into slow meanders through valleys dotted with patches of open grassland. And in those pockets of sunlit openness, the small elephants called Stegodon florensis insularis would graze, their long curved tusks sweeping low as they fed on grasses and tender shoots. And it was these creatures, more than any other, that provided the main source of meat for the tiny humans of Flores. Though hunting such an animal was no small feat for a species whose tallest individuals barely reached the height of their prey's shoulder. And so, Homo floresiensis likely relied on strategy over strength, working together in groups, perhaps driving a young stegodon into a pit, or toward an ambush where waiting hunters could strike with sharpened stone-tipped spears. And while meat was a valuable resource, their diet must have been broad and opportunistic, taking advantage of whatever the island offered, from fruits, nuts, and tubers dug from the forest floor, to birds, lizards, and the eggs of ground-nesting species. For in an island ecosystem, survival meant adaptability. And these little humans were nothing if not resourceful, shaping small but efficient tools from volcanic stone, using flakes and choppers to butcher meat, scrape hides, or carve wood. And even though their brains were only about a third the size of ours, their tool-making skill shows a mind capable of planning, of understanding materials, and of passing on knowledge from one generation to the next. A chain of teaching and learning that may have stretched back hundreds of thousands of years to the first of their kind to arrive on Flores. For the archaeological record hints that human presence on the island goes back far beyond the lifespan of Homo floresiensis itself, perhaps to around 800,000 years ago, suggesting that their ancestors, possibly Homo erectus, were the ones to make the initial crossing. Their descendants gradually shrinking over many millennia under the selective pressures of isolation, limited food, and a lack of large predators. Though on Flores, there were still dangers to watch for. For sharing the island with them were giant storks, whose beaks and size might have made them formidable if approached carelessly, and massive Komodo dragon relatives, perhaps even larger than those alive today, whose stealth and patience could make them a deadly threat to a distracted hunter or a child wandering too far from camp. And so it is likely that vigilance was part of daily life, with fires kept burning not only for cooking and warmth, but for protection. The flicker of flames perhaps casting shadows on the cave walls where stories were told. For though we cannot know the content of their communication, we can imagine that, like all humans, they shared information about the location of food, the habits of animals, the shifts of weather, and that over time, these practical exchanges may have blended with ritual or storytelling, binding their small communities together in a web of shared memory and perhaps also in shared fear. For on an island as small as Flores, even slight changes in climate could be felt in every part of life. And during the Pleistocene, the world's climate was far from stable, swinging between glacial and interglacial periods, each shift altering sea levels, rainfall, and vegetation, so that the people of Flores would have had to adapt again and again, moving their camps, changing their hunting patterns, and sometimes perhaps going hungry when resources were scarce. And in such times, their small body size may have been an advantage, for it meant less food was needed to survive. Yet it also made them vulnerable to injury or predation. And unlike us, they had no metal, no bows, no domesticated animals to help in the hunt. Only their wits, their tools, and their cooperation. Yet somehow, against all odds, they endured for tens of thousands of years, their existence a testament to the many forms that humanity can take. And it is in the details of their anatomy that we find further clues to their adaptation. For while their skulls were small, their teeth were proportionally large, suggesting a diet that included tough or fibrous foods requiring heavy chewing. And their wrists were more primitive in shape, resembling those of much older human species, which may have limited some forms of precision grip, but did not prevent them from making effective stone tools, while their feet were unusually long relative to their legs, with a low arch and a structure that may have made them less efficient runners, but steady walkers over rough terrain. And their shoulders and arms showed signs of strong climbing ability, perhaps a remnant from an arboreal past, or simply a useful skill for foraging in forested areas. And all these traits together painted a picture not of a flawed or deficient human, but of a lineage finely tuned to its specific environment, surviving where larger, more advanced humans might have failed. And yet for all their success, their time would eventually end. And the reasons for this have been the subject of much debate. Some suggesting that modern humans arriving in the region brought competition, disease, or conflict. Others pointing to volcanic eruptions that may have devastated parts of the island. Still others to gradual environmental change that made survival impossible. But whatever the cause, by around 50,000 years ago, the caves of Flores fell silent, their hearths cold, their stone tools left abandoned in the dust. And the smallest humans to ever live became another lost branch in the tangled tree of our family. Their story buried until the patient work of archaeologists brought them back into our awareness, reminding us that the path of human evolution is not a simple march toward greater size or intelligence, but a vast and varied experiment in adaptation, where even the tiniest among us could thrive in their own way, in their own corner of the world. If the bones and tools of Homo floresiensis tell us the tangible facts of their existence, then the stories of Flores tell us something else, something hazier, stranger, perhaps less certain, but no less fascinating. For scattered through the oral traditions of the island is the persistent tale of the Ebu Gogo, small hairy people who were said to live in the forested highlands, quick and elusive, with long arms, pot bellies, and an odd muttering speech that echoed the words of humans without quite getting them right. And in some versions of the tale, they could steal food from gardens, take chickens or fruit, even snatch a child if given the chance. Though the storytellers would often insist that the Ebu Gogo were clever enough to evade capture for long periods, able to slip into caves or dense undergrowth where no one could follow. And while too many such tales are the stuff of folklore, it is difficult not to wonder whether they preserve, in garbled form, a cultural memory of Homo floresiensis, passed down through many generations until it became more myth than history. For modern humans reached the islands of Wallacea, including Flores, by at least 50,000 years ago, and some researchers speculate that our ancestors and the little people of Flores may have overlapped in time, their meeting perhaps sparking the origins of such stories. And if that is so, then those encounters could have been anything from wary observation at a distance to occasional conflict over resources. For an island ecosystem does not easily support two separate human species competing for the same food and shelter, especially if one is already finely adapted to the environment. And yet the arrival of modern humans often spells change for isolated species, whether through direct competition, the spread of diseases to which the locals have no immunity, or even the introduction of new hunting pressures. And in the case of Homo floresiensis, we can imagine scenarios where their population, already small and fragile, was pushed past the point of recovery, dwindling year by year until only the myths remained. But the possibility also exists that their end came not from us, but from the island itself, for Flores sits in a tectonically active region, its landscape shaped by volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. And one such eruption around 50,000 years ago left a layer of ash across the island, which some scientists link to a massive event at the nearby Mount Egon or another volcano, an event that could have destroyed habitats, poisoned water, and driven both prey and predator into decline. And for a species living so close to the edge of survival, such an ecological shock might have been fatal, leaving only the wind and rain to scatter their bones until a few were sealed safely in the cool darkness of Liangboa Cave, waiting for the day human curiosity would unearth them again. But even with that discovery, many questions remain unanswered, and one of the most tantalizing is whether Homo floresiensis was truly a descendant of Homo erectus that shrank over time, or whether they branched off from a much earlier ancestor, retaining primitive traits that had been lost in other lineages for their combination of features: the primitive wrist bones, the long flat feet, the unusual shape of their shoulder joint, hint at a deeper evolutionary root, perhaps even a connection to species like Homo habilis or Australopithecus far earlier in the human story. And if that is true, then their journey to Flores was even more extraordinary. For it would mean that a small-bodied, small-brained human species managed to cross stretches of open ocean long before the great navigators of the later Pleistocene, making them not just survivors of isolation but pioneers of it. Their presence on Flores, a reminder that the seas of the ancient world were not impassable barriers but challenges that determined adaptable beings could meet. And if we think of them in this way, then Homo Floresiensis stands as a testament to the diversity of human capability, proof that intelligence comes in many forms and scales, and that survival depends not on size alone, but on the ability to fit oneself to the demands of a place. Yet the deeper we peer into their world, the more it seems that they were walking a tightrope, each generation balancing the need for cooperation, for knowledge sharing, for passing down skills, against the hazards of life on a small and often dangerous island. And here we return to the image of their tools. Simple by our standards, yet perfectly suited to their purposes. Shaped from local chert or volcanic rock, their edges sharp enough to cut hide or slice meat, and perhaps carried in woven pouches or tucked into belts of bark fiber. For even without sewing needles or pottery, they would have used what the island gave them to make shelters, coverings, and containers. And these practical details, repeated across countless lifetimes, would have formed the backbone of their culture, as important to their survival as any story or belief. And perhaps, when the day's work was done, they would gather together in the warm glow of firelight, the little ones listening wide-eyed as the elders recounted hunts or dangers averted, or the changing signs of the seasons, their voices blending with the night sounds beyond the cave, where the forest whispered and the waves of the distant shore marked the passing of time in a rhythm older than any of them. And in that moment, they were simply human. Small humans, yes, but bound by the same needs, hopes, and fears that have always shaped our kind, from the tallest to the tiniest. The sun rises slowly over the eastern ridges of Flores, its first light spilling like molten gold over the thick canopy of trees. And in the cool half-darkness of a limestone cave, the small figures of Homo Floresiensis begin to stir, their sleep broken not by alarm or clock, but by the rhythms of the forest around them. For the early morning air is alive with the calls of birds and the far-off bellow of a stegodon, somewhere in the valley below. And as the embers of the night's fire are coaxed back to life with handfuls of dry leaves and twigs, the group's day begins, not with idle conversation, but with the quiet, efficient motions of a people for whom every daylight hour is precious. For food must be found and tools must be maintained, and in a world without stored grain or penned animals, survival depends on the constant interplay between movement and memory, between the need to seek out what is new and the need to remember where resources can be found again. And so two of the older members, their faces lined by years of sun and smoke, begin sharpening stone flakes against a larger core. The rhythmic chip-chip sound mingling with the crackle of the fire, while nearby a woman sorts through a pile of foraged tubers dug the day before, inspecting each one for rot or insect damage. Her small but strong hands quick and sure, for she knows that every mouth in the group must be fed, from the youngest child still clinging to its mother to the hunters who will soon head into the forest. And when they do, they carry with them more than tools. They carry knowledge passed down in gestures and demonstrations, in the quiet apprenticeship of the young to the skilled. And today's hunt will take them toward the grassland fringe, where they hope to find signs of a juvenile stegodon. For a young animal is slower and less wary, and if they can separate it from its herd and drive it toward a pitfall or a choke point along a narrow ravine, they may bring down enough meat to feed the group for days. And as they set out, their small bodies moving with a lightness that leaves barely a mark on the leaf litter, their senses are alert to every sound. The rustle of leaves that might betray a reptile, the distant alarm calls of birds, the snap of a branch in the undergrowth. And when they pause to drink from a stream, they scan its edges for edible plants. For in their world, every journey is a blend of purpose and opportunity, and no potential meal is ignored. Whether it is a cluster of berries, a freshwater crab hiding beneath a stone, or the eggs of a waterfowl, which can be carried back in woven grass pouches. And when they reach the hunting ground, their movements slow, voices drop to murmurs, and the hunters fan out, using hand signals to coordinate. For though their language, if we could hear it, might lack the complex tenses and syntax of our own, it would still be rich with meaning, filled with calls, grunts, and gestures that bind the group into a single organism, able to act in concert as they edge closer to their quarry. And when at last the chance comes, it is swift, a coordinated rush, a flurry of movement, a cry from the startled stegodon as it stumbles into the narrow ravine, where sharpened spears are thrust with all the strength their small arms can muster. And when the animal falls, there is no celebration, only the practical urgency of butchery. For meat spoils quickly in the humid air, and the smell of blood may draw dangerous scavengers, so the work is done quickly, methodically, with the choicest guts taken first, wrapped in broad leaves for carrying, and the heavier bones cracked on the spot for marrow. While back at the cave, the rest of the group prepares for their return, tending the fire so it burns low but steady, weaving cord from strips of bark, or chipping more flakes from the stone cores to replace those dulled or broken. And when the hunters finally arrive, laden with food, the cave comes alive with the bustle of cooking and dividing portions. For sharing is not only a matter of fairness, but of survival, ensuring that every member of the group has the strength to work, forage, and protect the young. And as the sun dips low in the sky, painting the forest in shades of amber and shadow, the day's labor draws to a close. The group gathering once more by the fire, the smell of roasting meat mingling with the earthy scent of damp stone. And perhaps, in this moment of relative safety, they speak of the day's events, pointing toward the direction of the hunt, miming the movement of the stegodon, or warning of a place where a snake was seen. And as darkness deepens, they huddle close, the fire casting dancing patterns on the walls. The forest outside alive with the unseen. And it is here, in these small moments between the urgency of work and the uncertainty of night, that their humanity is most visible. Not in grand gestures or monumental achievements, but in the quiet, enduring bonds that tie them to one another. In the way the elders glance at the children, in the way food is placed into smaller hands first, in the way a shared life is lived under the endless cycle of sun and stars, just as it had been for countless generations before them, and just as it would be until the day came when their kind was no more. The rhythm of life on Flores was never constant, for the island lived under the sway of the monsoon, a great pendulum that swung between the drenching abundance of the wet season and the parched austerity of the dry. And with each shift came changes that Homo Floresiensis had long since learned to navigate. For when the rains came, they came in earnest, hammering the canopy until the forest floor steamed, filling rivers until they roared, and sending waterfalls cascading in white torrents down the black cliffs of volcanic rock. And in those months, food was plentiful, the forest offering fruit in heavy clusters, tender shoots sprouting everywhere, and streams swollen with fish that could be caught in woven traps or scooped from shallows with quick, practiced hands. And the group would range widely, venturing to known groves where tubers could be dug from soft, wet soil, or to lowland areas where stegodon herds lingered in the abundance, for the animals too followed the pulse of the season, growing fat on the lush grasses and easier to find when trails turned to mud, their footprints deep and clear. And in this season, the group's fires burnt brighter, fueled by dry wood gathered before the rains began. Their caves and overhang shelters fragrant with the smoke that kept insects at bay. The children well fed and lively. The elders telling longer stories, sometimes humming or clapping in quiet rhythms that seemed to pass the time between foraging trips. But as the wet months waned, the air grew drier, the rivers shrinking to narrow, sluggish flows, the green of the forest paling to duller shades, and the stegodon herds began to wander farther afield, often moving to higher ground where some green still clung to the hillsides. And in these leaner months, the little humans' movements changed, their foraging paths longer, their hunts more deliberate, the groups sometimes splitting into smaller bands to cover more ground. And two bears became more important, dug from hard soil with sharpened digging sticks, their skins peeled with care to remove any bitterness, while fruits grew scarce and the forest fell quieter. The bright chorus of the wet season replaced by the rasping calls of dry weather insects and the occasional screech of a hunting bird. And it was in these months that danger from predators was most keenly felt. For the great monitor lizards, hungry and restless, would prowl closer to the edges of human camps, drawn by the smell of cooking or the scraps left behind, and the people would keep their fires high at night, their sleeping spots pushed deeper into the cave's protective darkness, with sentinels posted. Always one of the older hunters, whose hearing was sharp, or a younger one, eager to prove their watchfulness. And there were other dangers too. Sudden changes in weather when a dry season storm rolled in from the sea, or rockfalls loosened by unseen tremors beneath the ground, reminders that the island was restless, its volcanic heart capable of reshaping the land in a day. And yet through all this, life went on, as it had for generations beyond counting, births marking the passing of time more surely than the seasons. A newborn's first cry greeted with quiet joy, but also with the knowledge of the work ahead. For a child would be carried everywhere until it could walk, nursed and fed from the group's gathered food, taught by example as soon as it could watch and mimic. And by the time it was 5 or 6 years old, it would know how to strip bark for cord, how to spot the tracks of a monitor lizard, how to choose the right stone for a cutting tool. For learning was not an event, but a continuous flow, each day adding some small skill, each mistake corrected by a gesture or a soft sound from an elder. And as these cycles turned, wet to dry, dry to wet, the people adjusted in quiet, practiced ways, their entire existence a dance with the island's moods, a balance between taking what was offered and enduring what was withheld. And sometimes, perhaps once in many years, this rhythm was broken by the rare sight of strangers. For while Flores was isolated, the sea did not keep all others away forever. And there may have been times when Homo Floresiensis saw figures on the distant shore, taller, broader figures, moving in boats or rafts, their voices carrying strangely over the water. And whether these were other islanders or the first modern humans venturing through the archipelago, we cannot say, but such moments, if they happened, must have been charged with tension, for the little people would have known that strangers could bring change, and change on an island could be as dangerous as any predator. And so, perhaps they watched from the tree line, still and silent, until the strangers were gone, returning to their fires and their forging, keeping their own ways alive for as long as the island allowed, until the day came, whether by hunger, eruption, or the encroachment of others, when the cycles ended, and the wet season returned to find the caves empty, the footprints on the trails washed away, and only the forest remaining, its green canopy hiding the memory of the smallest humans to ever live. And so, as the scientists crouched inside Liangboa cave, brushing away the soft sediment that had lain undisturbed for tens of thousands of years, the skeleton slowly emerged in the pale lamplight. Not just a scattering of bones, but a nearly complete individual who would rewrite the story of what it meant to be human. her delicate skull no larger than a grapefruit, her femurs short and slightly curved, her teeth small yet perfectly formed, and her proportions unlike any modern human they had ever seen. A moment so surreal that even the experienced archaeologists exchanged glances in silent disbelief, for they realized they were looking at the remains of the smallest adult human species ever found. A being who had once walked and hunted and thought in ways both familiar and alien. And as news spread from this remote Indonesian island to the world's scientific community, debates ignited instantly. Some claiming she must have been a modern human with a developmental disorder such as microcephaly or dwarfism, while others insisted her anatomy was far too consistently distinct across multiple individuals to be anything but an entirely separate species. And over the years, careful analysis of wrist bones, shoulder structure, foot proportions, and cranial capacity confirmed she belonged to a lineage branching off from our own deep in the past, possibly descending from an early Homo erectus population that, isolated on Flores for countless generations, underwent island dwarfism until they reached their tiny stature, yet retained enough intelligence to craft stone tools and adapt to the hazards of their rugged volcanic home. A home teeming with strange life forms such as giant storks, Komodo dragons, and the now extinct pygmy stegodon. An elephant-like creature, small enough for these hobbit-sized humans to hunt. And while much of their daily life must be pieced together from fragments, stone flakes chipped into sharp edges, charred bones hinting at cooking fires, and the careful placement of bodies suggesting some form of ritual, the evidence paints a picture of a species that, despite their size, thrived for hundreds of thousands of years, perfectly attuned to their island world, until something, whether the arrival of modern Homo sapiens, a sudden environmental shift, or a combination of both, led to their disappearance around 50,000 years ago, leaving behind only the silent witness of their bones, their tools, and the legends of Flores villagers who spoke of the Ebu Gogo, the little people who could talk but not clearly, who could steal food and slip away into the forest shadows, myths that may be echoes of a time when two very different kinds of humans looked into each other's eyes across the flicker of a firelight. The island of Flores, during the time of Homo Floresiensis, was a world both lush and perilous, a place where towering volcanoes loomed over dense forests, where rivers cut deep gorges into the land, and the air was thick with the scents of tropical blooms and damp earth, where the calls of birds echoed through the canopy, and the rustle of unseen creatures stirred in the underbrush. And it was here that these small humans lived out their days, moving with practiced familiarity through landscapes that would seem hostile to outsiders, navigating lava fields, crossing streams, and climbing the low hills in search of food, their diet a testament to both adaptability and ingenuity. For they hunted the pygmy stegodon, a stocky dwarf elephant whose calves could be brought down with teamwork and stone-tipped spears, while adults might have been driven into natural traps such as pits or mud to be dispatched more easily. And they likely supplemented their meat with birds, reptiles, and fish, as well as roots, fruits, and seeds gathered from the forest, all of it prepared at small campfires that cast dancing shadows against the rock walls at night, where the smell of roasting meat mingled with the sound of quiet voices. Voices that may have carried a form of language, though what words they spoke we can never know, only that the precision of their tools and the complexity of their survival suggest minds capable of planning, cooperation, and passing knowledge from one generation to the next. And as the millennia passed, they thrived in balance with their environment, facing predators such as giant marabou storks with spear in hand and keeping a wary distance from the formidable Komodo dragons that roamed the island. creatures large enough to threaten even adult members of their species. And yet, despite these challenges, Homo floresiensis endured for hundreds of thousands of years, until the fateful time when modern humans arrived in Southeast Asia. Their larger brains, more advanced tools, and mastery of long-distance travel, perhaps giving them an advantage that the hobbits could not overcome. And whether by direct competition for resources, exposure to new diseases, or simply the slow erosion of their population in the face of changing conditions, these small people slipped quietly out of existence, their bones buried in the dust of Liangbua, while the jungle reclaimed the paths they once walked, leaving only whispers in the stories of the island's later inhabitants, who spoke of the Ebugogo as if remembering a shadow of the past. And so, when we look at the remains of Homo floresiensis today, we are not merely looking at bones, but at a chapter of our shared human story. A reminder that our family tree is not a single straight line, but a sprawling, tangled forest of beings who dreamed, struggled, and adapted in their own ways, and perhaps in honoring their memory, we can carry forward the understanding that humanity has never been one thing but many, and that even the smallest among us can leave an echo that reaches across tens of thousands of years, touching us with the quiet truth that every life, no matter its size, holds immeasurable worth. And so we say, in the spirit of respect for those who came before, may the story of the little people of Flores be remembered not as a curiosity, but as a testament to the vast and beautiful diversity of the human journey, one in which even the tiniest footsteps leave a lasting mark upon the earth. And so we say, in the spirit of respect for those who came before, may the story of the little people of Flores be remembered not as a curiosity, but as a testament to the vast and beautiful diversity of the human journey, one in which even the tiniest footsteps leave a lasting mark upon the earth. And as we close our eyes on their memory, may we carry forward the quiet wisdom they leave behind, that life's value is not measured in height or strength or years, but in the way we shape the world around us and the way our stories endure, whispered from one generation to the next, across time and across oceans, until they reach us here, now, in this moment. And with that thought, I wish you peace. I wish you rest, and I send you gentle warmth across the ages. From their island home to wherever you may be, good night. And may your dreams be as rich and timeless as the world they once knew.